Hi guys, and thank you for coming back to watch another video. Today I'm going to be making baozi, or steamed buns. The first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually start weighing out my ingredients for my dough. I actually like to make my dough first because I get to let it rise while making my filling, and by the time I'm done making my filling, the dough is ready to use. So I just wrap everything and go. You, depending on what you're going to be doing, how you're doing everything, maybe you want to make your filling first and leave it overnight. Maybe you want to let your dough rise overnight. Don't care, it's up to you. I'm actually using quite a lot of flour, 1 kilogram, 1,000 grams, because I'm making two kinds of baozi today. I'm making one with filling and one without filling. After measuring the flour, I'm going to measure about 60% of that weight in water. So this is about 600 grams of water or 600 milliliters. Then I'm adding some sugar, 1 tablespoon for every 300 grams of flour. Some salt, because bread really needs salt, about a teaspoon or so per 300 grams of flour. After that, it's going to be some yeast. So I use 1 teaspoon of yeast for about 300 grams of flour, so a good heaping tablespoon is fine here. After that, I'm going to mix all my dry stuff together, so this way it's all evenly distributed. All the yeast is not in direct contact with any of the sugar or salt in case it might kill it, slow the growth as per all the famous bread makers. I like to add a little bit of oil into my baozi dough, about a tablespoon per 300 grams, because it helps keep juices in. Now I'm going to add my water and I'm going to mix all of it together until all the flour has been moistened and it's starting to come together. Now that it's more or less together, I can actually start to knead it, and because it is a bread dough, there's going to be quite a lot of kneading. While there's this kneading, I figure I should take the time to actually explain myself a little bit. Those of you who are proper Mandarin speakers will note that I said I'm making 2 baozi, one with filling and one without. If you are actually making baozi technically is the word you use for filled steamed bun. The proper word for a steamed bun without filling in quote-unquote proper Mandarin is mantou. However, there are plenty of places where bao or baozi is used for both. So don't judge me too harshly, ye proper Mandarin speakers. I know I'm a filthy American, but please spare me. Some more interesting things about baozi is that actually it's been in, I guess, a bit of attention recently, quote-unquote recently. Baozi, or rather nikuman, the Japanese version, was actually used as a signature challenge in the show Great British Baking Show, or Great British Bake Off, wherever you're watching it, to which I had a couple of feelings about, in particular because the judges said nikuman are so quintessentially Japanese. Now I'm going to avoid giving you all that rant because I'm sure that it's not going to be a very soothing cooking video if I do that, but hey, if you want to hear me rant about British judges claiming that steamed buns are quintessentially Japanese, comment down below and tell me, and maybe I'll make that video. Okay, now that my dough is essentially ready, I'm going to leave it to the side to let it rest, and I'm going to start working on the filling. Here you can see that I am going to be chopping some ginger. Some garlic. scallion. Some bamboo shoots. And also some mushrooms. The fun thing about baozi filling is that there's no real crazy rules about it. You can get away with quite a lot if you really, really want to. Here I am frying the garlic, ginger, and scallion. I actually don't mind just mixing it into the meat raw. However, my family actually thinks that the taste of garlic and ginger when it's raw like that and then steamed is a little too stringent. So frying it off helps with some of the flavor. Now I'm going to add some salt. I have a lot of meat to season. Some soy sauce. Hoisin sauce. Oyster sauce. And sesame oil. Be kind of sparing on the sesame oil. Sometimes too much is kind of pungent. Of course, now I'm going to mix everything together and I'm going to leave this to the side for a little bit. Now it's time to actually mix everything together. So this is the pork that I'm using. And I'm going to add the mushrooms and the bamboo. Since I'm using pork and bamboo, maybe I should call them shuangzhu bao. My Chinese humor is not very good, I'm sorry. Mix everything together as best you can. I'm going to also add some eggs to help bind everything. They also, with the yolk, help make it a little more rich. It also adds a little bit of water with as you'll see, I'm actually just going to add some straight up water. This is actually a tip I've seen in a couple of recipes, or they tell you to actually use broth because it tastes better, but adding some water to slacken the meat mixture helps make sure that it doesn't become too dense after you pack it and steam it. Now this is a really easy part. I'm going to prepare the paper for underneath the baozi so that they don't stick to my steamer. I'm actually reusing some old baking parchment. Make sure that if you try to do this the way that I am doing it, that your knife is sharp and that you're holding it at an angle so that it actually cuts through the paper. Here's our dough. You can see it's risen quite nicely. It's more than doubled in size. Now, usually when you make bread, you are supposed to quote unquote knock it back. You're gently deflating some of the air. As you can see, I'm not being very gentle. I'm actually being quite aggressive. This is actually okay for baozi. We don't want really huge air pockets in the dough. There's not going to be a crust like baked dough, so it needs smaller bubbles for structure. Now I'm going to divide the dough so I can work on it. You can see not very many air bubbles in there because I've knocked a whole bunch of them out. Now I'm going to work one half at a time and actually split it into several pieces. This is actually an interesting trick I learned from looking up some recipes, particularly for dumpling skin actually. So they tell you to make a ring and then you stretch it out so that it's roughly a uniform thickness around the ring. And then when you cut it up into pieces, all the pieces are going to be a little closer to being kind of the same. Unfortunately, I'm not super successful here because my dough still looks kind of lumpy. So you'll note that there are quite a few pieces. I'm making quite a lot of buns here for my family, and whatever we don't eat today is obviously just going in the fridge. Any of the dough I don't use for wrapping the meat filling is actually going to go into making the plain baozi. So I usually try to make extra, and then whether or not I actually end up with enough to actually make more than one plain baozi always remains a mystery. I can never seem to quite accurately guess how much of this is actually going to go into wrapping the filling. So now that everything's been cut up, I can work with one dough piece at a time and actually start wrapping meat and making actual buns. So I like to work the dough just a little bit more to make sure I get rid of all the last couple of air bubbles, coat it nicely in flour so it doesn't stick, and start rolling. So you want to try to actually make the edges thinner than the middle. This way when you wrap it, the bottom and the top are roughly similar thicknesses. This is my poor technique. If you watch some videos of people who have been doing this a lot longer than I have and are a lot better at it than I am, you can see them do this a lot more smoothly. But I'm working on it, I promise. Maybe I make these a little too infrequently and I need a little more practice. It's all rolled out, I'm going to put a bit of filling in the middle. It was a little too much filling though. And now I can start to pleat it and seal it. I usually try to make it so the pleat is kind of nice. If you don't want to pleat it, you can just pinch it all together and then turn the pinched side on the bottom and have a smooth top. There are lots of different ways of sealing baozi. Different people like to do it differently. Different people like to make their recipes entirely differently. My recipe is actually different than the way my mom likes to make it. Now we just have to let it steam. I like to turn it on, leave the pot with cold water, and then after about 20-30 minutes of seeing the steam, it's done. So there's my plain one, and here are my filled ones. And there we go. I made baozi. Here you can see a nice filling. It's not really dense inside. The dough is nice and soft. And of course, it's great fresh, so I have to take a bite. Thanks for watching.